You wake up in the morning and feel that quiet weight in your chest, like something fundamental is missing, but you can't quite name it. You go to work, go through the motions, chat with people, laugh when expected. But beneath it all is a persistent feeling that you're just going through the motions, playing a part without ever touching what truly matters. At night, when the house finally quiets down and you're alone with your thoughts, that question you've been avoiding all day creeps in. What's all this for? You achieve things, reach goals society deems important, maybe even find success by conventional standards. But there's this deep unease whispering that you're wasting something precious, that your life is slipping through your fingers as you chase objectives that don't fill the growing void within you. You try to fill this hole with distractions, with shopping, with entertainment, with superficial relationships, but nothing sticks. Nothing truly touches that existential hunger that's silently consuming you. And then comes the most terrifying fear of all. What if you reach the end of your life and realize you never truly lived? That you spent decades too busy to discover what would make your existence truly meaningful? That you died empty because you never found what only you could have brought into the world? Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist who survived the horrors of Auschwitz, discovered something in the darkest corners of human experience that can save you from this fate. He realized there's a specific way to die while living, to become a walking corpse long before your body stops functioning. And this death occurs when we lose touch with what makes our existence unique and irreplaceable. But he also discovered the antidote, the path back to a life pulsing with authentic purpose. And this knowledge was born precisely where all hope should have been extinguished. Frankl arrived at Auschwitz in 1944 with his wife, his parents, and the manuscript of the book that would become his major intellectual contribution hidden in his clothes. Within hours, everything was stripped away. His family was separated and sent to the gas chambers. His manuscript was tossed aside like trash. His name was replaced by a number tattooed on his arm, his professional and social identity reduced to nothing. He was naked, bald, starving, surrounded by guards who saw prisoners as less than insects. The survival rate in the camps was about 28 out of 100, and prisoners died not just from disease and execution, but from something Frankl identified as even more deadly: the total loss of purpose. He observed that prisoners who gave up internally, who lost any reason to go on, died with frightening speed. First they stopped washing, then they refused food, then they lay down on their bunks and simply faded away like candles without oxygen. Physical death was merely the final stage of a spiritual death that began the moment a person concluded their life held no possible meaning. But Frankl noticed something extraordinary. Some prisoners, even in the most degrading conditions imaginable, held onto an inner spark that radically set them apart. They weren't necessarily the physically strongest, nor the youngest or healthiest. They were those who had found some reason, however small, to keep existing. One man lived because his daughter was in another country, and he needed to reunite with her. Another survived because he had unfinished scientific research that only he could complete. Frankl clung to the image of his wife, not knowing if she was still alive, and to the possibility of one day rewriting and teaching the ideas he had developed. These threads of meaning, fragile as they were, made the difference between preserving one's inner humanity or dissolving completely into the horror. This discovery in the camps led Frankl to formulate what would become the central principle of his entire philosophy and therapeutic practice. Humans are not primarily motivated by the pursuit of pleasure, as Freud believed, nor by the pursuit of power, as Adler proposed, but by the search for meaning. Frankl realized we can endure almost any suffering if we can find a why to justify it. But even in material abundance and the absence of pain, we become profoundly unhappy if our lives lack genuine purpose. He called this hunger for meaning the will to meaning, and observed that in modern society, this fundamental need was being systematically frustrated. People in post-war Europe and America had more comfort, more security, and more options than any previous generation, yet they were experiencing escalating levels of depression, anxiety, addiction, and suicide. Frankl began treating patients who had no traditional psychiatric diagnosis, no significant childhood trauma, no obvious biochemical dysfunction, but were consumed by an existential emptiness that made their lives unbearable. He developed a completely new therapeutic approach, logotherapy, focused not on analyzing the past or adjusting behaviors, but on helping people discover the unique meaning their lives could hold. The term comes from logos, the Greek word for meaning, and it represented a radical shift in psychology. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with you?" Frankl asked, "What is your life calling you to do now?" The core question Frankl posed to each patient was deeply unsettling. Life owes you nothing. You owe something to life. While modern culture teaches us to constantly ask what we want from life, what life can give us, Frankl completely flipped that equation. He insisted that life poses questions to us every day, specific situations demanding answers only we can provide. Our task isn't to define the meaning of life in the abstract, but to discover the concrete meaning that this particular situation, this specific moment, this unique responsibility is demanding of us. For a terminally ill patient, the meaning might be in how they face death with dignity. For a widowed mother, it could be in raising her children in a way that honors her husband's memory. For an artist, it might be in completing a work that only they could bring into the world. Meaning was always specific, personal, situational, and critically, not something we invented or arbitrarily chose, but something we discovered through a deep listening to what life was asking of us in that moment. Frankl rejected both the nihilism that claims nothing has meaning and the subjectivism that says we can invent any meaning we want. For him, meaning was out there, in reality, waiting to be discovered and realized through our actions and attitudes. And now, I want to pause and really talk to you who are watching. I know many of you carry this sense of existential emptiness we've been describing, this unsettling intuition that you're living a life that isn't truly yours, that you're fulfilling external expectations while ignoring an inner calling you can barely hear. So, I want to ask you, have you ever felt like you're dying a little each day because you can't find what would make your life genuinely meaningful? If this question touched something real in you, simply type in the comments, "I feel this existential emptiness." You don't need to elaborate, no need to explain. Just those words are an act of courage and honesty. And know that by sharing this here, you're doing something much bigger than you imagine. You're showing dozens, maybe hundreds of other people watching this video in silence, suffering alone with this same emptiness, that they are not isolated in this search. Your courage to name this pain creates a safe space where others can acknowledge their own experience without shame. When you write in the comments, you validate not only your own journey, but offer permission for others to confront this fundamental question as well. Let's create a community here of people, honest enough to admit that easy answers don't work, brave enough to seek something deeper. Frankl identified 3 primary paths through which we can discover meaning in our lives. And it's crucial to understand that these aren't optional routes or vague therapeutic suggestions, but fundamental structures of human existence that function whether we believe in them or not. The first path is through creative values, which means bringing something into the world that wouldn't exist without you. This isn't limited to grand works of art or scientific breakthroughs. It could be creating a business that solves a real problem, developing a skill and using it to serve others, or simply doing your job, whatever it may be, with genuine excellence and dedication. Frankl told a story about a prisoner in Auschwitz who was a cobbler. Even in the camp, when he could find scraps of leather, he worked to make or repair shoes for other prisoners with meticulous care. This man found meaning not in the grandeur of his situation, but in the quality of his contribution, however small. The criterion wasn't the magnitude of the accomplishment, but the authenticity of the engagement, the feeling of bringing something into the world that reflected his unique capabilities. Many modern people are stuck in jobs they consider meaningless because they've lost this connection between work and genuine contribution. Frankl would suggest that even seemingly trivial work can become meaningful if you can reconnect it to how it serves others or develops your own capacities in ways that matter to you. The second path is through experiential values, which means finding meaning not in what we do, but in what we experience and whom we encounter. Frankl placed immense importance on the human capacity to be touched by beauty, truth, and kindness found in the world. A moment contemplating nature, a deep conversation with someone you love, the experience of listening to music or reading a book that transforms how you see the world, genuine love for another person, where you connect not with a projection or fantasy, but with who they truly are in their irreplicable uniqueness. Frankl often recounted how, during forced marches in the concentration camp, he and other prisoners would sometimes stop for a moment to contemplate a particularly beautiful sunset seen through the trees. The guards would yell at them to keep moving, but for those stolen seconds, the prisoners touched something that completely transcended their degrading situation. The beauty of the sunset didn't free them physically, but it reminded their souls that they were still capable of perceiving and connecting with something larger than the immediate horror. In modern life, where we are constantly bombarded with stimuli and distractions, we've largely lost this capacity to truly experience. We consume entertainment without ever being truly moved by it. We are with people without truly encountering them in their unique otherness. Frankl would challenge us to redevelop this deep receptivity, this capacity to let the world and others transform us through genuine encounter. The third path, and perhaps the most radical and least understood, is through attitudinal values, meaning finding meaning in the attitude we adopt in the face of unavoidable suffering. Frankl didn't romanticize suffering or suggest we should seek it out. He was clear that unnecessary suffering should be eliminated through action. If you're in a toxic job, leave. If you're in an abusive relationship, end it. If you have a treatable illness, get treatment. But he recognized that there's an irreducible residue of suffering in the human condition that no action can eliminate. Inevitable losses, terminal illnesses, the death of loved ones, aging, the finitude of our own lives. Faced with this unavoidable suffering, we still have a fundamental freedom that no one can take away. The freedom to choose our attitude. We can become bitter and resentful, or we can grow through the ordeal. We can shut down and become cynical, or we can deepen and become more compassionate towards the suffering of others. We can allow pain to diminish us, or we can use it to become nobler versions of ourselves. Frankl saw this constantly in the camps, prisoners in the same horrific conditions reacting in radically different ways. Some became brutal, stealing food from weaker companions, losing all decency. Others became saints, sharing their last crust of bread, offering comfort, maintaining their inner dignity intact. Suffering revealed character, but it also offered the opportunity to forge character. The question was never whether we would suffer, but whether our suffering would have meaning or be wasted. This understanding leads us to one of Frankl's most unsettling and liberating concepts: existential responsibility. Every moment of our lives poses a question, and we cannot help but answer it. Even refusing to decide is a decision. Even fleeing responsibility is a form of assuming it through a mission. Frankl used a powerful metaphor. Imagine you're lying on your deathbed, looking back at your life, and everything you didn't do, everything you avoided, all the calls you ignored are laid out before you. The missed opportunities, the undeveloped talents, the uncultivated relationships, the truths left unspoken, the courage not shown. You might make excuses saying you were afraid, that society didn't encourage you, that your parents didn't support you, that circumstances were tough. All of these things might be true, but in the end, you'll have to look at that unlived life and recognize that it was your responsibility, that no one else could have lived it for you. Frankl insisted that this responsibility isn't a burden that should crush us, but rather what makes our lives meaningful. Precisely because no one else can live your life, because your experiences and situations are unique, because you have a specific combination of talents, limitations, relationships, and opportunities that has never existed before and will never exist again, your life matters. What you do with it matters. How you respond to the calls you receive matters. You can't outsource this responsibility to a guru, a therapist, a political system, or an ideology. In the end, it's your life, and you'll have to answer for it. But Frankl also recognized something many existentialist philosophers overlooked. The human condition is not one of absolute freedom, but of limited freedom. We don't choose when we're born, where we're born, into what family, with what genetics, or with what social circumstances. We don't choose many of the tragedies and limitations we face. Frankl called this fate, the dimension of our existence that is beyond our control. But within this fate, There is always a margin of freedom, however small. In the concentration camps, prisoners had no control over almost anything. They didn't choose what they ate when they slept, whether they would live or die the next day. But Frankl observed that even there, an inner freedom existed that the guards couldn't touch. A prisoner could choose to share their last crumb of bread or steal it. They could choose to hold on to hope or surrender to despair. They could choose to see their fellow inmates as competitors in a Darwinian struggle for survival, or as human beings worthy of compassion. These choices seemed externally insignificant, but they determined whether a person preserved their humanity or lost it entirely. In modern life, our fate is different but equally real. You might be born with a genetic predisposition for anxiety or depression. You might have grown up in poverty or faced abuse. You might have physical or intellectual limitations. You might be facing a terminal illness. Frankl never minimized these realities, but he insisted that within them there is still room for a free response, and it is in this space that our humanity is defined. One of Frankl's most famous case studies perfectly illustrates how logotherapy works in practice. An elderly physician came to see him, deeply depressed. His wife had died 2 years earlier, and he simply couldn't get over the loss. Frankl could have explored the man's childhood, analyzed his defense mechanisms, prescribed medication. Instead, he asked a single question: what would have happened if you had died first and your wife had been left a widow? The doctor immediately replied that it would have been terrible for her, that she would have suffered enormously. Frankl then said, "You see, your suffering now has saved her from that suffering. You are suffering in her place." Suddenly, the man's suffering gained meaning. It was no longer a purposeless ordeal, but a sacrifice of love. The grief didn't magically disappear, but its quality changed completely. What was unbearable because it seemed absurd became bearable because it had meaning. Frankl wasn't manipulating the patient with empty platitudes. He was helping the man see a real dimension of his situation that he had lost in the fog of pain. The love he felt for his wife hadn't ended with her death. It was now expressing itself through his willingness to bear the pain she would have felt had the roles been reversed. This was true, not therapeutic fantasy. And this truth transformed how the man experienced his suffering. If these ideas are resonating with something deep inside you, if for the first time in a long while, you feel like someone is speaking directly to that part of you that craves real meaning, not just superficial motivational fluff, then I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel. Every week, I dive deep into the thought of Viktor Frankl and other humanist philosophers who offer genuine answers to the existential crises so many of us silently face. This isn't a channel for quick fixes or shallow positivity techniques. It's a space where we explore the most profound questions of human existence with intellectual seriousness, but also with compassion and practical applicability. If you're tired of content that treats symptoms without addressing the existential roots, if you're seeking a community of people who are also on this journey of self-discovery and responsibility, then you've found your place. Hit that subscribe button now. You don't have to walk this search for meaning alone. Join us in this exploration of the deeper dimensions of what it truly means to be human. Frankl developed specific therapeutic techniques based on his understanding of human nature. And 2 of them are particularly ingenious because they work with fundamental psychological paradoxes. The first is paradoxical intention, primarily used to treat anxiety and phobias. Frankl noticed that when we try to force something to happen, we often produce the opposite effect. The harder we try to fall asleep, the more awake we become. The more we try not to be anxious before a presentation, the more anxious we get. The more we try not to think about something, the more we think about it. So he would instruct patients to do the exact opposite, to deliberately intend what they feared. That patient afraid of trembling during presentations would be told to try and tremble as much as possible. Someone with insomnia would be instructed to try and stay awake for as long as they could. What happened was fascinating. By deliberately trying to produce the symptom, the patient generally found they couldn't. The trembling wouldn't come when intentionally attempted. Sleep would arrive when they stopped forcing it. Frankl explained this through the human capacity for self-distancing. We can place ourselves in an objective relationship with ourselves, observe our own psychological processes with a certain ironic detachment. When we do this, we break the vicious cycle of anticipatory anxiety, where the fear of the symptom produces the symptom, which produces more fear. The technique wasn't a superficial manipulation, but was based on a deep understanding of how our reflective consciousness works. The second technique is dereflection, which Frankl used especially for treating sexual problems and excessive obsession with one's own performance or internal state. He observed that many psychological issues were caused by hyper-intention and hyper-reflection, overthinking about oneself, obsessively monitoring one's own performance, focusing too much on one's own happiness or satisfaction. A man with impotence is often so fixated on his performance that he can't surrender to the experience. Someone desperately seeking happiness often pushes it away because they are so self-absorbed that they can't genuinely connect with anything outside themselves. Frankl proposed deflection, redirecting attention away from oneself, towards the partner in the case of sex, towards a meaningful task in the case of work, towards the beauty of the world in the case of seeking happiness. He had a wonderful principle. Happiness cannot be pursued. It can only happen as a byproduct of dedicating yourself to something larger than yourself. The more you chase happiness directly, the more it eludes you. But when you forget yourself in serving a cause, loving a person, creating something meaningful, happiness shows up uninvited. This is deeply connected to the concept of self-transcendence, the idea that human nature is fundamentally directed outward, toward the world, toward others, toward meanings and values that transcend the ego. The more we are trapped in self-concern, the more unhappy we become. The more we can forget ourselves in genuine engagement with the world, the more fulfilled we become. Frankl's relevance to the contemporary world is, if anything, even greater than it was in his time. We live in a culture that promised that by eliminating external suffering, we would find happiness. But we've discovered that material comfort doesn't fill existential emptiness. We have more access to entertainment, more career options, more personal freedom than any previous generation, yet rates of depression, anxiety, suicide, and addiction continue to climb. Frankl would diagnose this as noogenic neurosis, an illness of the specifically human dimension, the dimension of meaning. We try to fill the existential void with consumption, with status, with endless digital distractions, with a hedonistic pursuit of experiences, but none of it touches the real hunger. It's like trying to satisfy physical hunger with pictures of food. You can consume endlessly without ever being satisfied because you're trying to feed the wrong part of yourself. The noetic dimension, the specifically human layer that seeks meaning and values, cannot be nourished with things that only satisfy biological or psychological needs. It needs genuine meaning, real values, meaningful contribution, and this meaning cannot be manufactured artificially or bought off the shelf. It has to be discovered through authentic engagement with the questions our specific lives present us. But here's the ultimate paradox we need to face. Frankl never offered a universal formula for finding meaning. He couldn't tell you what the meaning of your life is, because meaning is always personal and situational. What makes my life meaningful might be completely different from what makes yours meaningful. The meaning my life holds today might be different from the meaning it will hold 5 years from now when my circumstances change. Frankl could only point to the framework. You have the capacity to find meaning through creating something, through experiencing something or someone, or through your attitude toward unavoidable suffering. But what creation, what experience, what attitude specifically you should pursue that you need to discover for yourself by deeply listening to what life is asking of you right now. That responsibility cannot be outsourced. No one can look at your life from the outside and tell you what your unique purpose is. Therapists, mentors, philosophers can help clarify the question. They can remove obstacles preventing you from hearing the call, but in the end, you have to provide the answer. And that is simultaneously the most frightening and most liberating part of Frankl's philosophy. You are radically free and radically responsible. Free because no one can determine from the outside what your life means. Responsible because no one else can live your life for you. So we return to that unsettling image from the title, "You will die empty unless you discover this." This isn't a magic technique, it's not a hidden secret, it's not a one-size-fits-all formula. This is the realization that your life has a specific question for you, that there's something only you can contribute to the world, and that until you discover and live that truth, you'll remain fundamentally unfulfilled, no matter how many external successes you rack up. Dying empty means reaching the end having left your song unsung, your gift unshared, your potential unrealized. It means having gone through life too distracted, too afraid, or too complacent to truly answer the call that was uniquely yours. Frankl saw this happen literally in the concentration camps. People who had every external reason to give up, but who chose to preserve their humanity and find meaning even there. And he saw it happen metaphorically in affluent society. People with every external reason to be happy, but who were spiritually dead because they had lost touch with what would make their lives meaningful. The question Frankl leaves us with isn't how to avoid suffering, but how to transform our unavoidable suffering into something that matters, how to find the unique tasks our life sets before us, how to respond with authenticity and courage to the calls only we can hear. If you've made it this far in this video, don't let this understanding evaporate the moment the screen goes dark. Share in the comments. What do you recognize as a call in your life that you've been avoiding answering? What fear or complacency has been holding you back from living your deepest truth? And if this content has struck a chord, if for the first time you feel you've found a philosophical approach that speaks directly to your existential quest, then hit that like button so the algorithm can show this video to others who are also on this quiet journey of seeking meaning in a world that offers mostly distractions. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because we'll continue to explore the deeper dimensions of humanist thought weekly that can transform not just how you think, but how you live. Life is asking a question of you right now, in this moment. Do you have the courage to listen and respond?